tonight here on In Focus with a look at what's making news now beyond our borders. France and its allies fighting Islamist militants in Mali are ready to begin their military withdrawal from the country. French President Emmanuel Macron says the withdrawal from Mali would take 4 to 6 months. Relations between Paris and Bamako deteriorated since the ruling military junta went back on an agreement to organize an election in February and propose holding power until 2025. It has also deployed Russian private military contractors, which some European countries have said is incompatible with their mission. Diplomats are warning that spiraling violence could give fresh force to migration from West Africa to Europe. All right, let's get more on that now, and we're joined tonight by Good Governance Africa security analyst Stephen Buchanan-Clarke. Stephen, good evening. Good to have you once again with us tonight here on In Focus. The breakdown in diplomatic relations there between France and Mali, what does this represent in terms of geopolitics and where things are moving?
First, thank you for having me, and evening to your viewers. Yes, I think we heard a very significant development yesterday. Ahead of the EU summit in Brussels, President Macron gathered leaders from the G5 Sahel states, Mauritania, Chad and Niger, to announce that French forces would be withdrawing from Mali and redeploying to Niger and other Sahelian states. I think this represents a couple things. Firstly, immediately it is a result of the complete breakdown of relationship between Mali, who is now run by the military head of the military junta, Colonel Assimi Goïta, who took power in a coup in early 2020, and France. It also poses a major concern for regional security arrangements in the area. And calls into question a number of facts, such as the dire humanitarian situation in the Sahel, and ultimately how a more cohesive security arrangement can be formed.
Yeah. The withdrawal of the French troops itself from Mali presents a major logistical challenge, right? As you put it, it may increase the risk of security. In fact, it may even increase the risk of attacks by Islamic militants. How does this now work out? How does it play out? How do they handle it?
Well, there's still a lot that's unclear. So President Macron has announced that all troops will withdraw within 6 months. And that it'll start with the shutting of French bases in northern Mali. However, it's unclear what this means for other security arrangements in the region. For example, the European Takuba Task Force, which is a European counterterrorism task force which operates across the Sahel and is under French command. It is unclear how this will impact on that task force. It is unclear how France intends to deal with the inevitable security vacuum that will arise from the withdrawal of its forces without putting its allies in danger. Already, just in the last 6 months, we've seen increased activity by insurgents coming further south in Mali. And organizations like the Islamic State in the Greater Sahel, Janum, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate, have been much more bullish in their attacks towards West African states. So it really is, at this stage, I think, unclear how France intends to pull off the logistical side of this without putting its partner forces in danger.
Now, what does this then mean also in the context, as you mentioned, that there is this now joint declaration on the fight against the terrorist threat and the support to peace and security in the Sahel and West Africa that has now come out of this particular meeting. Does Mali now fall out of that declaration?
Well, I think it's important we put this into context and these and the military operations from France and Europe in the Sahel over the last sort of 10 years. So France intervened in Mali in 2012 under Operation Serval, and that was had a clear mandate Tuareg forces, separatists, and Islamic forces were heading to Bamako. France, at the request of the Malian government at the time, stepped in to push those forces back. It was widely seen as a success. However, just 2 years later, Operation Civil sort of morphed into Operation Buchanan, which over the last 8 years has sort of expanded its mandate. Its mandate's become more nebulous. It's currently mandated to really defeat terrorism across the Sahel, which is an incredibly nebulous sort of mandate. Any way you judge it, it has not been a success, despite a few key leading figures within insurgent groups being killed. Ultimately, the insecurity has just expanded through the region and into West Africa. So the Operation Buchanan, by any sort of metric, has been a failure. And even before this announcement yesterday, as early as last year, President Macron had announced that Operation Buchanan would draw down from 5,100 forces to about 2,000. What's significant about this announcement is the removal of forces from Mali. So I think until the political negotiations are settled with the ruling military junta, Colonel Goida, and a transition to civilian rule, it is unclear exactly how Mali will be able to rejoin sort of regional security arrangements. And at this stage, it's unclear that it really wants to. It's reached out to Wagner Security Group, a Russian private military company who currently has about 800 forces in the country at the moment, which has is one of the reasons France itself is pulling out, and that Mali has received so much international condemnation from Europe.
Yeah. Does it present any challenges for the region, this existence of a private military force from Russia, and issues of territory and so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Russia has been has prioritized Africa over the last 2 years in terms of security cooperation and development. The Wagner Group, which is now present in Mali, has also been present in Central African Republic. It's fought in Libya, in Mozambique. What is a major concern, I think, is that they operate largely outside of international humanitarian law. In places like Central African Republic, gross human rights violations has been attributed to the Wagner Group. And I think leaders see Wagner as an option for security assistance, which comes with no strings attached. There's no accountability, no real oversight. However, the cost is usually in terms of mining concessions or other mineral concessions. So in that way, I think the disruption that Wagner Group will have to sort of regional security arrangements is significant. The potential for Wagner Group to engage in violation of human rights and create further resentment among the local population is also a major issue. Yeah.
So then the African Union Summit, they're calling for the High Representative of the Coalition for the Sahel to swiftly organize a coalition ministerial meeting. What is going to be discussed in that meeting? They're calling for this meeting to assess the roadmap adopted in March 2021.
Yeah, so there is a significant degree of tension at this stage between ECOWAS and the military junta in Mali. Originally, following the early 2020 coup, Colonel Goida agreed to an 18-month timeline for holding elections and a transition to civilian rule, which would have put those elections just around this month, actually. However, he reneged on that and has called for a 4-year transition period, which ECOWAS has refused, and so there's still, I think, a huge rift between the two parties. However, there is rumors that this joint working group has been announced for transition to civilian rule. It is made up of Ghana, who which currently chairs ECOWAS, Senegal, who chairs the African Union, Mauritania, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Togo. I think a lot of work will still need to be done in terms of bridging that gap and finding a peaceful political settlement that can reinstate civilian rule. But at the moment, especially with the recent refusal at the UN Security Council by China and Russia to institute increased sanctions against Mali at the request of ECOWAS, I think those things are posing some real political challenges to creating the sort of leverage and pressures that would push a political settlement.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's been all sorts of talk around this. There are reports, for example, of a cost estimate of about $1.1 billion US or 1 billion euros that France spends a year on the Sahel mission. How much money are they making out of this, though?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, Operation Buchanan is a massive expense to France. There's also other costs. I mean, France, about 50 French soldiers have died during Operation Buchanan. Last year was the first year that public opinion really turned against the French military involvement in France, in the Sahel. So I think there's a lot of domestic pressure on President Macron to get French forces out of the Sahel, which is beginning to look a little bit like France's Afghanistan. However, there are some sort of political economy considerations, not so much in Mali, but in Niger has huge uranium deposits, and about 18% of French uranium is mined in Niger, which is through a company, Avera, which has a majority owned by the French government. So France does have very strong economic interest in the region, but I think when it comes to Mali, the security costs are just too great, and the chances of France sort of engaging in a never-ending war is a real point of consideration there.
Right, I appreciate your time there, Stephen. Thank you very much for coming on. Stephen Buchanan-Clarke there from Good Governance Africa.